Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing 10 of my absolute favorite fantasy and fantasy romance books that are perfect for fall. Alright guys, so I am officially back to work. My summer break is over, which means it is fall in my house. I have all of my Halloween decorations up. I am so excited. Fall is my favorite time of year. My birthday's in the fall, Halloween's in the fall. I love everything pumpkin spice. I love going apple picking. I am as basic as they come, and I am thrilled. It is finally my season. So anyway, I have 10 of my absolute favorite adult fantasy, YA fantasy, and fantasy romance books that are perfect for fall, and I am so excited to talk about them with you guys. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads, both linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about these fall books. So first up, we have Belladonna by Adalyn Grace. So this is a dark YA fantasy. I read this last year and loved it. This book has some very light horror elements along with a romance, and the entire book kind of has like a dark vibe. So the story is following Signa Faro, and at the start of our story, Signa is just a baby, and her mother takes her to this very grand party. Now, unfortunately, everyone at this party ends up being poisoned and then soon dies. So death shows up in corporeal form, ready to usher all of the souls into the afterlife. Now, when he touches baby Signa, he realizes that he can't take her soul, and then he becomes very, very fascinated by this seemingly immortal human. So he follows her for her teenage years. Now, Signa ends up being passed from guardian to guardian, and unfortunately, all of these guardians end up dying shortly after receiving Signa. So everyone in the town kind of thinks that Signa is cursed. On top of this, there have been a lot of accidents that should have caused Signa to die, and she doesn't because she's essentially immortal. So anyway, eventually Signa is sent off to some very distant relatives, and when she gets there, she is at the Hawthorne Manor, or mansion, and she starts seeing the ghost of the Lady of Hawthorne, and this Lady of Hawthorne says that she was poisoned, and now Signa, along with Death, have to discover who the murderer is. This book was so much fun. It is such an easy read, and if you're somewhat new to horror, I feel like this is a great place to start. There were some very, very creepy moments throughout this book. However, it is YA, so like it's intended for younger readers, so it's not like super creepy. But I love this. I also am currently in the middle of reading Foxglove, which is the sequel to this book, and it is just as good as the first one. So highly, highly recommend if you're looking for a good, scary YA fantasy. And next up, we have The Year of the Witching, and this is by Alex Henderson. So this is an adult feminist witchy fantasy, and it is so good and also so unique. So we are following Emmanuel, and Emmanuel lives in this very patriarchal society where there is a prophet that pretty much, his word is law, and all the women pretty much have to listen to the men in their lives. It's pretty much a horrible community. But anyway, Emmanuel has it doubly as rough as all of the other women because her mother ended up sleeping with an outsider of the community, and Emmanuel is considered like half outsider. So everyone treats Emmanuel super horribly, and one day she is doing her chores and she ends up in this wood, and everyone knows to stay clear of this wood because it is where the prophet murdered 3 witches. Well, Emmanuel ends up chasing a goat into the wood, finds this very, very creepy book, and hears voices of mysterious women who we assume are the witches, kind of telling her what to do, and the story goes from there. So it's really about Emmanuel finding this dark power within herself and being able to liberate herself from this horrible community, and it is so, so good and so disturbing. There is a scene at the very end of this book that lives rent-free in my mind because of the imagery and how like grotesque but also awesome it was. So highly recommend if you're in the mood for like adult witchy book. And next up, we have Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So this is an adult dark academia fantasy, and I absolutely adored it. I read this a few years ago. So in this story, we are following Galaxy Stern. Now, Alex Stern is able to see greys or ghosts. However, no one believes her. That is until a very upsetting event occurs that gains a lot of notoriety. And the person in charge of Yale ends up contacting Alex Stern and asks her if she would be a member of Leafy. So Alex becomes a student at Yale University, where she is in charge of monitoring these different secret societies that all are able to use dark magic. Now, the reason she's given this position is because she is able to see greys or ghosts, and the secret societies know that these ghosts can cause harm to their plans and like what they are doing, and also just to monitor the secret societies, because sometimes they like get a little out of control, gain a little bit too much power, and start meddling in things they're not supposed to meddle in. So anyway, Alexis Stern is now kind of learning how to be a student in an Ivy League college, and her mentor is Darlington. So Darlington has been a member of Leafy for a decent amount of time, and he's pretty much training Alex on how to watch over these different secret magical societies, until something goes awry and Darlington ends up going missing. So this story is jumping back and forth through time. We are following Alex and seeing kind of in her past and what led her to end up at Leafy University. And we're also trying to solve the mystery of what exactly happened to Daniel Darlington. So overall, I absolutely love this. I will say the sequel, Hellbent, I enjoyed even more. I think I rated this 4 stars and I rated Hellbent 4.75. I am so excited to see where this series goes. And next up we have The Undertaking of Hart and Mercy. So this is a adult fantasy rom-com. It's also a little bit spicy, which I was not expecting when I went into this, but I really enjoyed this. It is described as Howl's Moving Castle meets You've Got Mail, and I feel like that's pretty on point. So there are a lot of like whimsical elements to this. We are following Hart, and Hart is a marshal, which essentially means he fights these zombie-type beings that are plaguing this world, and he ends up sending those corpses to Mercy. Now, Mercy's family owns a morgue, and Mercy's pretty much in charge of like preparing the bodies to be buried. And Mercy and Hart do not get along. For some reason, there's just this tension between them, and they're very much enemies. So this is an enemies to lover story. But one day, Hart ends up writing a note that he doesn't plan on delivering. However, it is picked up by this giant, I think it's a rabbit, but they're like giant animals that are like the mailmen. It's very, very whimsical. Anyway, so this rabbit ends up delivering the letter to Mercy, and the letter is not signed. So they end up starting a pen-pal relationship back and forth, not realizing that they are both talking to each other. And this story goes from there. But I thought this was such a unique rom-com fantasy. I haven't read very many, and I really enjoyed this. It had those very whimsical Studio Ghibli type elements, but it also deals with death a lot. So there are some like creepier moments. There's also gods and demigods, and it's just such a fun story. So I highly, highly recommend. And next up we have Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. So this is an adult witchy fantasy. There is a romance, but I wouldn't say the romance is at the forefront. So the story is following Emery as our main character, and her friends are living on Saoirse Island. Now, Emery is really close with her friend August, and they've been dating for a while, and there's also another 2 teenagers that are all really close in this really tight-knit group. Now, everyone on Saoirse Island is kind of mysterious. There are some beliefs that this island is inhabited by witches, and everyone that lives on this island never really leaves. Now, August and Emery dream of leaving this island and going off and living their life. Unfortunately, something very upsetting happens, and August is accused of murder. So him and his mother are forced to leave the island, leaving Emery behind. Now, years later, August's mother ends up passing away, and her ashes are supposed to be buried on Saoirse Island. So August, now released from prison, takes his mother's ashes back to his hometown, where he is hated by everyone because everyone still believes he is a murderer. Now, Emery ends up rekindling her romance with August and doesn't believe he could have actually committed this murder. Unfortunately, all of these superstitious and crazy things start happening on this island, and everyone starts to think that it's actually August's doing, and the story goes from there. So I will say it has been a very hot minute since I read this book. I forget a lot of the details. However, I do remember this giving me like practical magic vibes and being super witchy, super not superstitious, but super just kind of eerie, and I really enjoyed it. So highly recommend if you're looking for a witchy fantasy. And next up is a YA fantasy. It is House of Salt and Sorrow by Erin A. Craig. So this is a dark Gothic 12 Dancing Princesses reimagining, and it also has a little bit of a romance. So the story is following Adalyn, and Adalyn is one of 12 sisters. Now at the start of our story, 4 of Adalyn's sisters have recently passed away due to tragic accidents. So Adalyn is trying to figure out what exactly is going on. Is her family cursed, or does someone just have it out for her family? Now, on top of trying to solve this mystery, the remaining sisters all are going to this mysterious magical ball in the middle of the night. And at first, Adalyn believes her sisters are all dreaming. However, they are coming downstairs in the morning with sores all over their feet, saying that they just danced the night away. So Adalyn is trying to uncover both of these mysteries, and while all of this is going on, like I said, there's a little bit of a romance. I really can't get into exactly who the romance is with because it gives away a huge spoiler, but I adored this book. It is so creepy. The imagery in this is amazing. I love the writing. So this is actually taking place on an island that's like right next to the sea, obviously. And the creepy like sea imagery is just, it is so well done. So highly recommend if you are looking for a very eerie YA fantasy this fall. And next up, we have The Atlas 6 by Olivie Blake. So this is dark academia, and I feel like the fall is the perfect time to pick up any sort of dark academia fantasy book. So this story is following 6 potential members of the Alexandrian Society. So the Alexandrian Society is filled with these magicians that guard the Library of Alexandria. Now, every few years or so, they have a contest where they will pick 6 people that are very proficient in a sort of magic, and they will all fight to earn a spot in the Alexandrian Society. Now, out of the 6 people, only 5 people will be selected, kind of leaving us to wonder what happens to that last person. So we are just following these applicants as they try to survive the trials that will allow them to become members of the Alexandrian Society, and it's a lot. I will say, I feel like this book is trying to be smarter than me in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it completely succeeded. The way this is written might not be for everyone. I actually listened to the audio while reading along with it. And I will also say this on Book Talk was being said to be like super spicy. It is not very much a romance at all, and there's very little to no spice. This is very much a dark academia fantasy. However, I still very much enjoyed it, and I'm very excited to pick up The Atlas Paradox, which I think actually released last year, but I have to do a reread of this before I pick that one up. And next up, we have another adult dark fantasy. This is Book of Night by Holly Black. Now, Holly Black is the same author of the Cruel Prince series, or the Folk and Air series, and personally, I was not a fan of that series, so I was very nervous to jump into this. This is her adult fantasy debut. However, I really liked this, which is really funny because a lot of people that are very like big fans of Holly Black's YA fantasy were not a fan of this. But overall, I just thought this book had a very like cool vibe. So the story is following Charlie, and Charlie lives in this world. This is like urban fantasy, so it's very similar to our world. So she lives in this world where there are glow-mists, or people that are able to manipulate shadows. So people in this world realize that shadows actually have like their own sort of magic, and by manipulating them, you can like do very thief-like things. So Charlie actually used to work with these glow-mists and was a thief. However, she kind of got out of the game and is now a bartender. That is until she ends up witnessing a murder involving one of these shadow magicians, and also involving her boyfriend, who doesn't have a shadow, because in this world, there are people that can actually have their shadows taken away. So overall, I really like this. I loved our main character. She definitely has that like cool bad girl vibe, kind of similar to Galaxy Start from Ninth House, which I know a lot of people aren't a fan of, but personally, I absolutely love. Like, it's one of my favorite type of characters. So I love this. It's a very short read and perfect if you're looking for a dark fantasy. And next up, we have Mexican Gothic, and this is by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So this is a historical horror, but it does have some fantastical elements, and I feel like this is a book that is best to go in blind. But we are essentially following Noemi, and she is a 20-something-year-old girl living in Mexico City, and her cousin has recently married this guy who lives in this isolated mansion, and Noemi really hasn't heard from her cousin since, despite them being very close. That is until a very concerning letter arrives, and Noemi decides that she is going to visit her cousin and travels to this isolated mansion. And as soon as she gets there, things start to go amiss. And then they start to go really bad. And I love this book. I read this book in one sitting. It is so creepy. And like I said, I really can't get into exactly what is creepy because it'll give away a huge spoiler, but there are parts of this book that like live rent free in my head that I think about all the time. Think The Last of Us, kind of that vibe. But overall, it is one of my absolute favorite horrors and perfect if you're looking for a really creepy read in the fall. And last up, we have House of the Hunger by Alexis Henderson. So this is the same author that wrote Year of the Witching, and I actually have a reading vlog where I read House of the Hunger for the first time that I'll leave in the cards and in the description. I had a lot of thoughts because this book pretty much has all of like my main fears in one book. Fears and phobias. So essentially this is following Marin, and Marin is a girl who's living with her brother in the slums or in poverty, and she has a really rough life. One day, while working, she sees an ad for a blood maid, and in this society, blood maids are these very beautiful women that give their blood to the hierarchy, and the hierarchy are like these different houses up north, and blood maids are really looked down upon. So anyway, Marin just wants to get out of her circumstances, ends up interviewing to become a blood maid, and is selected. So the story really starts when Marin ends up starting her job as a blood maid, and other blood maids start to go missing, and it is so eerie. So I have a huge phobia with needles and anything involving teeth. I hate teeth, and there is a scene in this book where someone is literally just yanking out their teeth, and I was cringing the entire time I was listening to the audiobook. Also, the blood maids, it's not exactly like vampires, like they actually use needles to give their blood, and there's a lot of like description on needles going into flesh and things of that nature, and it's a very uncomfortable read. However, it did its job and I was thoroughly creeped out. So if you want a very creepy and eerie fantasy, check out House of the Hunger. Alright guys, those are some of my favorite adult fantasy and fantasy romances that are perfect for fall. Please let me know if you have any fall book recommendations, leave them down in the comments below. I love getting recs from you guys. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week.